Julia, it's time you hand over half of your father's company. That sentence, sharp, shameless, cut through the laughter and clinking glasses at my birthday dinner. The air around the long mahogany table froze. Forks hovered midair, champagne glasses stilled, and 30 pairs of eyes turned to me. The voice belonged to Serena, my ex-husband's new wife, the woman who had slithered into my father's house tonight as if she owned it, and now dared to demand half of the empire he built with his bare hands, the empire he entrusted only to me. She smiled across the table, wine-red lips curved like a blade. Alessandro, my ex, sat beside her, his hand resting on hers with calculated arrogance. He didn't need to speak. His smirk said everything. This wasn't her idea. It was his move, spoken through her mouth. I sat still, back straight, my birthday cake untouched in front of me. The candles still smoked faintly, as though the house itself was holding its breath. "You heard me," Serena pressed, tilting her chin upward. "Half of the business, half of the fortune, $130 million. It's only fair." Gasps rippled around the table. Someone coughed nervously, another muttered under their breath. My brother, Matteo, shifted in his seat, shame flickering in his eyes. He already knew this was coming. Alessandro finally spoke, voice smooth as oil. "Julia, you can't seriously think you're capable of running all this alone. Serena is my wife now, and by extension, she has a rightful claim. It's time you faced reality." His words dripped with rehearsed confidence, but I heard the hunger underneath. He wanted what he had always wanted: control, power, money. Divorce hadn't changed him. It had only sharpened his appetite. I locked my gaze on Serena. "You're demanding my father's company at my birthday dinner." She didn't flinch. "Your father isn't here anymore. Things change. Families change. You can't expect to keep all of this for yourself. It's selfish, really." Her laugh was short, cutting, bouncing off the chandelier crystals like shards of glass. My fingers tightened around my wine glass, but I didn't drink. Instead, I let silence stretch, longer and longer, until it was almost unbearable. I wanted her to squirm, but Serena wasn't the type to squirm. She thrived on attention, on audacity. Inside, my chest burned, not with shock, but with something colder. A calm fury, like a storm moving silently across the Hudson before it swallows the city whole. My father's portrait stared down from above the fireplace, his eyes unyielding. He'd built Caboli Enterprises from the Newark ground up, brick by brick, deal by deal, long before Alessandro had ever brushed shoulders with me at Columbia. My father had died believing I would protect it. And now, on the night marking my 33rd year, his legacy was being challenged by a woman who hadn't even known his name 5 years ago. I didn't answer her immediately. I wanted everyone in that room, family, friends, business associates, to feel the tension press into their bones. Finally, I spoke, my voice low, steady. "So you think you're entitled to half of Caboli Enterprises, half of my father's blood, sweat, and fortune." Serena leaned back in her chair, sipping her champagne like she had already won. "Not think, Julia. No. And you'd be wise not to fight it. Courts have a way of favoring wives, not bitter exes." Her words stung, not because they were true, but because they were meant to humiliate. Alessandro's eyes glimmered with the cruelty of a man who enjoyed watching me bleed. The table whispered again, nervous and scandalized. An aunt murmured, "She can't be serious." A cousin shook his head in disbelief. But I stayed calm. Calm was the weapon they never expected me to use. I placed my glass down slowly, the crystal ringing softly against the wood. "And if I say no?" The room went still again. Serena's smile deepened. Alessandro's smirk widened. "If you say no," she purred, "then we'll take it from you anyway." And that was the moment, the precise second, when my birthday dinner turned from celebration to battlefield. The mistress had drawn her line in front of everyone I knew, and my ex-husband had declared open war. I smiled then, just faintly. Not the smile of someone cornered, the smile of someone already planning. Because what Serena didn't know, what Alessandro couldn't imagine, was that my father had prepared me for this night. He'd left me more than a company. He'd left me a secret. And as the candles burned down on my untouched cake, I promised myself one thing. They would both regret ever daring to take from me. I leaned forward, meeting Serena's eyes without blinking. "Is that your final demand?" The room pulsed with silence, because whatever she answered next would decide how I destroyed them. Before the birthday dinner, before the champagne soured in my mouth and Serena spat her poison across the table, my world still looked intact. Fragile, maybe, but intact. People like to imagine betrayal strikes like lightning, sudden and blinding. The truth is quieter. It seeps in like a draft under a locked door, cold long before you realize it. My life, at least on the surface, was measured and disciplined. Mornings began with black coffee in the kitchen my father designed, the smell of roasted beans rising through marble counters that reflected the early Newark light. The house wasn't just walls and glass. It was legacy, every brick paid for with his sacrifices. I guarded it the way a soldier guards a fortress, not for the luxury, but for the principle. Each morning I drove to Caboli Enterprises, the company my father had turned into a $130 million empire of logistics, construction, and property. I wasn't just his daughter, I was his heir, and every decision I made was shadowed by his ghost. Employees nodded when I walked through the glass doors, some with respect, others with suspicion. Being a woman in charge of an empire men believed they built had always been an uphill climb, but I never flinched. My father hadn't raised me to flinch. Yet even then, cracks existed. Matteo, my brother, had drifted. Once my partner in late-night planning sessions, he had slipped into a fog of gambling debts and reckless nights. He kept his distance, ashamed of the wreckage he left behind, and I let him. Protecting the company became easier when I did it alone. But even alone, I dreamed. My dream was balance, a life where my work wasn't a battlefield and love wasn't a transaction. It sounds simple, but after Alessandro, it felt mythical. Alessandro. Even saying his name now tastes bitter. When I met him at Columbia, he was dazzling. Sharp suits, fluent Italian charm, and ambition that could light up an entire room. My father admired him once, even trusted him enough to let him into our board meetings. But charisma can be a mask, and Alessandro wore his like armor. He studied people the way some men study markets, searching for weakness, leverage, opportunity. Back then, I thought his confidence was protection. Later, I realized it was hunger. Our marriage wasn't always fire and ash. There were nights in Manhattan restaurants, evenings in Montauk by the sea, mornings where his laughter felt genuine. But the flaws were there, subtle at first. How his compliments always ended in comparison, how his eyes lingered too long on power, how money wasn't security to him but a drug. He'd dismiss my father's warnings as old-world paranoia. He'd call my instincts overthinking, red flags painted as romance. And then came Serena. I didn't notice her at first. She appeared at a charity gala, young, sharp, with a smile that stretched too wide. She was a whisper at the edge of the room, the kind of woman who didn't introduce herself but positioned herself to be noticed. I caught her glances toward Alessandro, quick but repeated, like a moth circling a flame. He told me she was just a donor's niece. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. In hindsight, that was the first red flag. Not her presence, but the way he defended her so casually, so quickly, without me even pressing. His lies were still polished then, but lies all the same. Still, life continued in its rhythm. I managed board disputes, signed contracts, expanded into new ventures. The company thrived, even as my marriage hollowed out. Our dinner conversations shrank into silence. Alessandro traveled more, for deals. His phone buzzed after midnight. The smell of perfume I never wore clung faintly to his shirts. Dreams withered quietly. I poured myself into the company, into protecting my father's legacy, convincing myself it was enough. Nights, I'd sit in the study beneath his portrait, whiskey untouched at my elbow, and reread his letters. Lessons about patience, strategy, honor. "Julia," he once wrote, "a Kaboli wins not by force, but by foresight. The loudest man in the room is usually the weakest." At the time, I thought he meant competitors. I didn't realize he was describing the man I shared my bed with. When the marriage finally split, it was messy but swift. Infidelity, hidden accounts, the usual betrayals. He walked away with enough to keep him comfortable, but not enough to sink me. At least, that's what I thought. He remarried within a year to Serena, the donor's niece, who had been circling all along. Their photos flooded social media: champagne toasts, yacht decks, designer clothes. I ignored them, let them rot in their illusion of triumph. I told myself I was free, but freedom, I learned, is fragile. Because while I rebuilt, they plotted. While I shielded Kaboli enterprises from vultures, Alessandro and Serena sharpened their knives in silence. The red flag, the true one, came 2 months before my birthday. It was an innocuous moment, one that slid under my defenses. I had just finished a long board meeting when Matteo appeared in my office, disheveled but determined. His eyes darted nervously, and his hands twisted the brim of his cap. "Julia," he said, voice low. I heard something. From one of Alessandro's people." I stiffened. "What kind of something?" He hesitated, chewing his lip. "He's talking about the company again. About making it his. Said Serena's the key." I wanted to dismiss it. Gossip. Matteo had been unreliable before, and my instinct was to protect myself from disappointment. But his eyes, they weren't lying. They were haunted. That night, alone in my father's study, I thought about what Matteo had said. My mind replayed Serena's smile at that long-ago gala, Alessandro's easy dismissals, the perfume that lingered too long. All the little details I'd ignored, each one a tiny blade, now cutting all at once. It wasn't paranoia. It was prophecy. Still, I told myself it couldn't happen. Not really. The company was secure. The will was ironclad. My father had trusted me, and I had built walls high enough to keep them out. But 2 months later, on my 33rd birthday, Serena leaned across the dinner table with her wine-red lips and demanded half of it all. And in that moment, I realized Matteo's warning hadn't been a whisper. It had been the starting gun. The betrayal had begun long before that night, and so had my revenge. Betrayal is rarely loud. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or marching drums. It creeps in quietly, smiling as it pulls up a chair at your table. And yet, when it strikes, the sound inside your head is deafening. The night after my birthday dinner, I couldn't sleep. Serena's demand replayed in my ears, looping over and over like a broken record. Half of your father's company, half of the fortune. The audacity of it clung to me like smoke. But worse than her voice was Alessandro's silence. That smug smirk, the glint in his eyes like a man who had been waiting for the right stage to reveal his hand. By dawn, I had already convinced myself it was just bravado. Maybe Serena wanted attention. Maybe Alessandro was bluffing. But deep down, I knew better. They weren't just playing dress-up with my father's empire. They were moving pieces on a board I hadn't seen yet. 2 days later, confirmation arrived. It came in a thin envelope slipped under my office door. No return address, no signature. Inside, a single sheet, a copy of a legal notice filed quietly in Essex County Court. Petition for entitlement to Kaboli Enterprises assets, on behalf of Mrs. Serena Rossi, spouse of Alessandro Rossi. My stomach dropped. It wasn't gossip. It wasn't bluff. It was war, written in black ink, stamped with a court seal. The petition claimed that because of Alessandro's previous marriage to me, and Serena's current marriage to him, she had a right to shared equity in all marital and post-marital assets. Their argument twisted timelines, contracts, and even my father's will, cherry-picking fragments to make it look like Serena was entitled to a seat at my table. It was absurd. But absurdity doesn't matter when money is involved. Lies backed by lawyers can weigh more than the truth. I held the paper in my hands until it crumpled, rage buzzing under my skin like electricity. My father's signature, his decades of sweat and loyalty to Newark, reduced to a bargaining chip for two parasites. I called Mateo that night. His voice trembled through the receiver. I tried to warn you. They've been planning this for months. Serena talks too much when she drinks. She said Alessandro told her you were weak, that you'd fold if they cornered you. Weak. The word hit harder than the lawsuit. I'd spent years proving I wasn't weak. Not to the board, not to the employees who whispered that a woman couldn't handle the empire, not to the ghosts who lingered every time I sat in my father's chair. And now, the man who had once vowed to protect me had declared me unfit. To Serena. To everyone. I slammed the phone down before Mateo could hear the crack in my voice. The next day, I sat in the boardroom. 12 men, 3 women, all watching me with that subtle shift in their eyes. Curiosity edged with doubt. Word had spread. Alessandro's petition wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was a rumor detonated on purpose. Serena had whispered it into the right ears. Alessandro had leaked it into the right circles. And now the room buzzed with invisible flies. Julia, one board member began cautiously, if there's any truth to these claims, it could destabilize investor confidence. Investor confidence. Code for, we don't trust you to keep control if this goes to court. I answered calmly. There is no truth. My father left the company in my name alone. Alessandro and his wife are grasping at straws. But my voice, steady as I tried to keep it, couldn't mask the shift in the room. Doubt is a contagion. And Alessandro had just infected my empire. That night, alone in my study, I poured whiskey for the first time in months. I didn't drink it. I just let the glass sit in front of me, the amber glow catching the lamplight. Steady, patient, accusing. My father's portrait stared down from the wall, his eyes burning with the same silent demand. Do something. I felt the grief first, heavy, suffocating grief, because betrayal isn't just losing someone's loyalty, it's realizing they never had any to give. Every memory of Alessandro twisted into something grotesque. The dinners where he praised my father's vision, the late nights we spent planning expansions, even the way he held my hand in public. None of it had been real. It was rehearsal. A dress rehearsal for this performance of theft. Grief melted into rage. I thought about Serena, her silk dress, her smug little smile as she demanded my father's life's work. I thought about Alessandro, sitting silently beside her, letting her speak the words he'd planted. They didn't just want my money, they wanted my humiliation. And that's when the final piece clicked into place. It wasn't about me being incapable. It wasn't even about Serena wanting to climb. This was Alessandro's plan from the beginning. He had married me for access, for status, for proximity to the fortune he could never build himself. When the mask slipped and I divorced him, he hadn't lost interest. He'd simply changed tactics, found a new pawn. The realization knocked the air from my lungs. This wasn't accident. This wasn't a desperate grab. It was calculated, designed. Every smirk, every whisper, every glance, premeditated. And suddenly, the rage sharpened into clarity. I wasn't weak. I wasn't cornered. I was armed. Because, unlike Alessandro, I had something he would never have: foresight. My father hadn't just left me a company. He had left me contingency plans, locked files, sealed letters, whispered lessons I hadn't yet used. His entire life he had prepared me for snakes like Alessandro. That night, I opened my father's safe. Inside, beneath stacks of contracts, was an envelope marked in his handwriting, "In case of betrayal." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter, short, sharp, deliberate. My father's voice spilled out in ink. "Julia, if you are reading this, then the wolves are at the door. Remember, wolves only win when you play defense. Strike first, find their hunger, and use it to starve them. Everything you need is already in your hands." Beneath the letter was a list of names: Allies my father trusted implicitly, people who owed him favors, contacts scattered through Newark's veins. And one more thing. A key. Small, unmarked, cold in my palm. I didn't yet know what the key unlocked. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Alessandro's betrayal wasn't going to end in court filings and whispers. It was going to end in ruin. As I folded the letter back into its envelope, a strange calm washed over me. Grief dulled, rage focused. And a single thought, sharp as broken glass, sparked in my mind. A thought that would carry me through every sleepless night to come. If Alessandro and Serena wanted my father's empire, then I would give them a stage big enough to destroy themselves on. Publicly, permanently, piece by piece, until they had nothing left to take. That was the night I stopped being their victim. That was the night I began planning their destruction. When you've been betrayed, there are two paths: endure it quietly, or burn the whole thing down. For days after the petition arrived, I walked a knife edge between both. Part of me still wanted to believe it could be handled the civil way: lawyers, contracts, courtroom battles. But each time I replayed Serena's words, each time I saw Alessandro's smirk in my mind, something darker pressed at the edges. They didn't just want money. They wanted spectacle. They wanted me humiliated in front of everyone my father had once commanded respect from. And humiliation is a debt I don't forgive. I spent the week observing. In boardrooms, I kept my face calm, my tone professional, as whispers circled about the lawsuit. I watched who shifted uncomfortably when Serena's name was mentioned, who glanced at Alessandro's allies, who avoided my eyes. The rot was spreading, just as he intended. Alessandro thought I would crumble under the weight of perception, but he had made one fatal mistake. He mistook my silence for weakness. I saw it in his eyes the next time we crossed paths, at a networking luncheon in Newark. He strutted across the room like a king returning to his stolen throne, Serena trailing behind him in another one of her red dresses, her laugh slicing the air. When our eyes met, Alessandro's smirk widened, as if he was already writing my obituary. "Julia," he said smoothly, reaching for my hand as though we were still husband and wife. "I hope there are no hard feelings. This is business after all. Business." That was his word for betrayal. I let him hold my hand, but I didn't squeeze back. I only looked at him the way my father once looked at men he was about to crush in negotiations. Steady, unreadable, patient. "No hard feelings," I murmured. "Only clarity." His brow twitched for just a second, the only tell he had. Then he laughed, dismissing me. To him, I was a cornered queen on a chessboard, the last piece to be toppled. That night, in the stillness of my study, I pulled out my father's letter again. "Strike first. Find their hunger, and use it to starve them." The words burned into me. I thought about Alessandro's hunger, for power, for validation, for control. I thought about Serena's hunger, for wealth, for recognition, for a throne she hadn't earned. They weren't partners. They were addicts, desperate for their next hit. Addicts are easy to manipulate. The decision crystallized in me like ice forming on glass. This wasn't going to be a defense. This wasn't going to be about proving my innocence or their guilt. This was going to be a dismantling. I wasn't going to stop them. I was going to feed their hunger until it consumed them. The next morning, I met Matteo. He looked like hell. Tired eyes, hands shaking from too many nights lost to his debts. But when he spoke, I heard something I hadn't in years. Sincerity. "I want to help," he said quietly. "I know I've failed you, Julia, but I know Alessandro better than you think. I've run in the same circles. I've heard the rumors. I can be useful." For a moment, the old wound screamed at me to push him away. But then I remembered my father's list of allies, and Matteo's name wasn't on it. Maybe that was the point. Maybe Matteo had to choose it for himself. "Useful how?" I asked. He swallowed. "They think I'm weak. They talk around me. They let things slip. If you want information, I can get it." I studied him, weighing the risk. Trust had burned me once already, but revenge doesn't thrive on trust. It thrives on leverage. And Matteo, broken as he was, might be exactly the leverage I needed. "All right," I said. "But understand this. Once we start, there's no undoing it." He nodded. "Then let's start." That was the moment the decision sealed itself in blood. Not a courtroom battle, not a settlement. Revenge. Cold, calculated, absolute. Days later, I saw the first sign that Alessandro had no idea what was coming. Serena, drunk on champagne at another gala, bragged too loudly about their imminent victory. She laughed about how I was still playing dress-up in Daddy's office, while she would soon sit at the head of the table. I watched from across the room, my face unreadable, my heart steady. They believed I was finished. They believed their victory was inevitable. And that was my weapon. The underestimation of your enemy is the sweetest advantage. Every great empire falls the moment it believes itself invincible. My father knew that. Now, Alessandro was about to learn it. I began quietly reaching out to names on my father's list. Old allies, forgotten favors, people Alessandro didn't even know existed. I didn't tell them everything, just enough to plant seeds, just enough to set the stage. And then, late one night, I stood in my study again, holding the small, unmarked key my father had left behind. Its weight was deceptively light, but in my palm, it felt like a blade. I didn't yet know the lock it belonged to, but I knew what it symbolized. My father's trust. His final reminder that every betrayal has a price, and every empire has traps built into its walls. As I turned the key over in my hand, the decision no longer felt like a choice. It felt like destiny. Alessandro and Serena believed they were dismantling me piece by piece. What they didn't know was that I had already started dismantling them. Revenge isn't rage. Rage burns too hot, too fast. Revenge is patience, strategy, precision. It's building a cage so elegant that your enemies lock themselves inside, thinking they've won. That was the lesson my father drilled into me, and as I stared at the key he left me, I knew it was time to put it to use. The first step was information. No revenge succeeds without it. Alessandro and Serena thrived on secrecy. Deals whispered behind champagne glasses, documents signed in shadows. To dismantle them, I needed to drag those shadows into the light. Matteo became my eyes. At first, I doubted him. His debts, his shame, his track record of failure. But betrayal has a way of clarifying loyalty. Alessandro had once treated Matteo like a disposable pawn, laughing at him in back rooms, dismissing him as a drunk. That insult still burned in my brother's chest, and now he carried it like a weapon. He started small, lingering at the bars Alessandro frequented, slipping into circles where men with loose tongues bragged about dirty money. Slowly, pieces emerged. A bank account Serena had in her maiden name, fed by transfers that didn't match her official income. A shell company Alessandro had created in Delaware, one that consulted for Caboli Enterprises, but never delivered actual services. On paper, they were clever. In practice, they left trails. Trails Matteo carefully documented and slipped into my hands like contraband. But information alone wasn't enough. I needed proof that could not be spun, denied, or buried. That's where my father's list came in. I started calling old allies one by one, men and women who owed my father favors, judges, accountants, even a retired detective who once kept union trouble from boiling over. Each conversation was delicate. I revealed nothing, only asked subtle questions, planting seeds of doubt about Alessandro's integrity. More than once, I felt the pause on the other end of the line, that hesitation that comes when someone realizes they may be speaking against the wrong side. I learned to leave silences hanging. People will fill silence with secrets. Weeks passed. By day, I played the dutiful heir, attending board meetings, signing contracts, pretending nothing had changed. By night, I spread my net wider. My loyal friend Clara, my father's former assistant, helped me sift through archives, contracts, and emails. She had an uncanny memory, recalling offhand remarks Alessandro made years ago, comments that now revealed themselves as breadcrumbs. "Remember when he asked for copies of your father's health records?" she whispered one night as we combed through files. "I thought it was strange then. Maybe he was planning this far earlier than we knew." The thought made my stomach twist, but it also hardened my resolve. This wasn't greed born yesterday. It was premeditated theft stretching back years. But the closer we drew to the truth, the more dangerous the game became. One night, while leaving the office late, I caught sight of a black car idling too long by the curb. Its headlights followed me for 3 blocks before peeling away. Another time, I noticed Serena's cousin, a slick little man with too much cologne, lurking near Coboli headquarters, pretending to smoke. The message was clear. They suspected me. The closest call came 2 weeks later. Matteo had arranged to meet a contact of Alessandro's who claimed to know where certain funds were hidden. We chose a quiet cafe in the Ironbound district, Matteo arriving first, me trailing behind to observe unseen. But when the man showed up, Matteo's face blanched. It wasn't the contact. It was one of Alessandro's bodyguards, grinning like a cat who'd cornered a mouse. I stepped inside before Matteo could panic, sliding into the booth with calculated calm. "Problem?" I asked, my voice as steady as stone. The bodyguard shrugged. "Just curious what the Cobolis are plotting these days." For a moment, silence choked the air. Then I leaned forward, let my smile spread just enough to unsettle him. "Plotting? No, we don't plot. We build. But thank you for confirming Alessandro is worried enough to send his dogs sniffing around." His smirk faltered. He left without another word. Matteo exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. That was the night I realized how thin the line was. One misstep, one wrong word, and Alessandro would know everything. The stakes weren't just money anymore. If they exposed my counterplay too soon, I'd lose not only the company, but possibly my freedom. And yet, the danger didn't scare me. It thrilled me, because fear is a compass. It points to exactly where you need to go. Piece by piece, the plan formed. First, let them believe their lawsuit was winning. I fed the board carefully chosen bits of information, whispers of my own fatigue, suggestions that I was considering a settlement. Doubt spread like poison, and Alessandro drank it like wine. Second, exploit Serena's vanity. Matteo discovered she kept a private Instagram account under a fake name, flaunting luxury goods bought with stolen money. We leaked a few screenshots anonymously, just enough to spark quiet inquiries. She thought she was untouchable. Soon she'd realize every photo was a noose tightening around her neck. Third, identify the stage. Revenge needs an audience. My father had taught me that public betrayal demands public punishment. And what better stage than the Coboli Enterprises annual gala, a gathering of investors, press, and politicians. A place where Alessandro and Serena planned to announce their new role in the company, parading their victory in front of the world. They thought it would be their coronation. I would make it their execution. Clara and I began drafting the materials, financial records, bank transfers, screenshots, all cross-referenced, airtight. The retired detective from my father's list agreed to authenticate them, ensuring no lawyer could dismiss them as fabrications. Every document went into a sleek black binder I locked in my safe, its weight growing heavier each day, not with paper but with certainty. Still, doubt clawed at me in quiet hours. What if I was wrong? What if Alessandro was too powerful? Serena too cunning, the board too cowardly? But then I'd remember Serena's smirk, Alessandro's hand on hers at my birthday dinner, the way they demanded half of everything in front of the people I loved. And the doubt hardened into resolve. The final piece came with the key my father left me. After weeks of searching, I discovered its lock, a small deposit box in a Newark bank under his name. Inside, I found one last gift. A recording. My father, voice gravelly but firm, detailing a conversation with Alessandro years ago. If you ever try to touch what isn't yours, I'll make sure my daughter buries you with your own ambition. It wasn't just a message. It was a weapon, proof that my father had seen through Alessandro even then. When I left the bank, the key cold in my pocket, I knew the plan was complete. I had information. I had proof. I had allies. And I had the perfect stage. Alessandro and Serena believed they were weeks away from triumph. But as I locked the binder, placed my father's recording beside it, and shut the safe with a final click, I whispered the truth into the empty room. The plan is ready. And this time, the only ones walking into a cage would be them. The night of the Caboli Enterprises annual gala arrived draped in velvet and arrogance. Newark's skyline glittered beyond the glass walls of the ballroom, chandeliers raining light down on politicians, investors, journalists, and board members. This was supposed to be Alessandro and Serena's stage, their coronation, and I had chosen it precisely for that reason. Every detail had been calculated. Clara handled the guest list to ensure the press had front-row seats. Matteo, for once steady and sober, shadowed the room, ready to deliver documents to allies at my signal. The retired detective lingered near the stage, his presence quiet, but his credibility undeniable. And in my safe back home, the black binder with its mountain of evidence had already been copied 10 times over, sealed envelopes addressed to the right people should anything go wrong. There was no going back. Tonight, I wasn't defending my father's empire. Tonight, I was ending theirs. Serena arrived first, in a dress dripping with sequins, each one catching the chandelier light like shards of glass. She held Alessandro's arm as if she were royalty, her head tilted just enough to let the cameras catch her profile. She thrived on spectacle. Tonight, spectacle would be her undoing. I watched them from across the ballroom as whispers followed in their wake. Some guests congratulated them prematurely. Others exchanged wary glances. The board members, gathered like a flock of nervous birds, shifted uncomfortably. Doubt had already been planted. Tonight, I would harvest it. Dinner passed in a blur of clinking silverware and polite conversations. Every course felt like a countdown. I sipped water, not wine, needing clarity. My father's voice echoed in my mind. Strike first. Use their hunger to starve them. Finally, the moment arrived. Alessandro rose, Serena by his side, his smile gleaming under the lights. He tapped his glass with a fork, and silence rippled through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice smooth, practiced. "Tonight, we celebrate not only the continued success of Caboli Enterprises, but also its future. A future where leadership reflects unity, progress, and strength. Unity, progress, strength." His favorite mask words. Serena stepped forward, her laugh slicing the quiet. "It's time the world knows what we've built together. This company deserves more than clinging to the past. It deserves leaders unafraid of change. And as Alessandro's wife, I am proud to announce—" Enough. My voice cut through the air like a blade. Chairs scraped as every head turned toward me. I rose slowly, deliberately, my heels clicking against the marble floor as I walked to the stage. Alessandro's smirk didn't falter, but his eyes flickered with something else. The faintest shadow of doubt. "Julia," he said smoothly, "this isn't your moment." "On the contrary," I said, climbing the steps. "This is exactly my moment." The ballroom pulsed with silence. I turned to the crowd, letting my gaze sweep across familiar and unfamiliar faces. Tonight, you were about to witness theft disguised as progress, betrayal masquerading as unity. But my father built this company on truth, and it's time you all saw it. I raised a hand. Matteo, pale but resolute, stepped forward and handed me a folder. Clara moved discreetly to pass copies among board members and journalists. Whispers erupted as papers changed hands. "These are records of forged consulting contracts," I said, my voice steady, projecting. Shell companies funneled millions from Caboli Enterprises into Alessandro's personal accounts. Funds laundered through Serena's so-called charities. Every dollar stolen from the business my father built. Gasps rippled. Flashbulbs popped. Alessandro's mask cracked. He stepped forward, voice rising. "This is slander, fabrications." The retired detective spoke from the back of the room, his voice gravelly but commanding. "I authenticated every document. They're real, and I'll testify under oath." The room erupted. Investors murmured, journalists scribbled. Board members stared at Alessandro like he had grown horns. Serena's face blanched beneath her makeup, her sequins suddenly looking like chains. I didn't stop. "Here," I continued, holding up another page, "are screenshots from Serena's private account. Luxury goods purchased with stolen funds, trips paid for with company money, proof of a lifestyle built not on success, but on theft." The images flashed on screens around the ballroom. Serena gasped, her composure slipping as whispers swelled into outrage. She turned to Alessandro, hissing something under her breath, but the microphones caught it. "You promised they'd never find out," the crowd roared. Journalists leapt to their feet, cameras flashing. Alessandro's smirk had vanished entirely, replaced by the tight jaw of a cornered animal. And still, I wasn't finished. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small recorder. I pressed play. My father's voice filled the room, gravelly but resolute. "If you ever try to touch what isn't yours, I'll make sure my daughter buries you with your own ambition." Silence slammed down like a gavel. My father's ghost had spoken, and every person in that room knew what it meant. This wasn't just betrayal of me. It was betrayal of his legacy. I turned to Alessandro, meeting his eyes. "You thought you could erase me, replace me, steal from me. But all you've done is build your own cage. And tonight, in front of everyone, you've locked yourself inside it." Serena's composure broke first. She lunged for the microphone, her voice shrill. "She's lying. This is a setup." But the board members weren't listening. The journalists weren't listening. The investors weren't listening. The room had already judged them guilty. Then came the final blow. Matteo stepped forward, holding up a USB drive. His voice, steady for once, carried through the microphone. "On this drive are recordings of Alessandro instructing his men to forge signatures. I know because I was there. I was part of it. Not anymore." Gasps erupted. All eyes snapped to Alessandro. His face drained of color, fury contorting his features. He lunged toward Matteo, but security intercepted, holding him back. The drive was plugged into the ballroom screens, Alessandro's own voice echoing through the speakers. "Sign it. She'll never know. By the time Julia finds out, the company will already be ours." The room exploded. Investors shouted. Journalists scrambled. Cameras captured every second. Alessandro thrashed, shouting denials drowned by his own recorded words. Serena tried to flee, but the press swarmed her, flashes exploding in her face. Board members stood, some shaking their heads in disgust, others whispering about legal removal. I stood still, calm, watching the empire of lies collapse brick by brick. And then, for the final blow, I stepped closer to Alessandro, lowering my voice so only the nearest microphones would catch it. "You thought you could bury me," I whispered. "But tonight, I buried you." His eyes burned with hatred, but behind it, fear finally flickered. Security escorted them both out as the room erupted into chaos. Journalists shouted questions. Board members demanded emergency meetings. Investors declared their loyalty to me. But I barely heard them. All I heard was the sound of chains breaking. Not mine, but theirs. Alessandro and Serena had come here expecting to crown themselves king and queen of my father's empire. Instead, they left in handcuffs of their own making, reputations shattered, futures annihilated. And as the flashbulbs lit up the ruins of their ambition, I felt the calm settle in my chest. The morning after the gala, Newark felt different. The city still roared. Taxis, trains, the hum of factories. But to me, the noise carried a new rhythm, It was the sound of freedom. For the first time in years, I didn't wake with Alessandro's shadow hovering over me. The press tore them apart. Headlines blared, "Caboli heir exposes multi-million-dollar fraud." Photos splashed across every paper, Serena mid-scream, mascara streaking her face. Alessandro pinned by security, veins bulging as he shouted denials drowned out by his own recorded voice. Their humiliation was complete, replayed endlessly on television and social media. The board moved swiftly. A unanimous vote stripped Alessandro of any remaining influence. Serena, never officially tied to the company, was banned from all premises, her lawsuit laughed out of court before it even reached trial. Investors who once doubted me now called to pledge loyalty, desperate to distance themselves from the wreckage. Caboli Enterprises didn't just survive the scandal, it grew stronger. And Alessandro? The prosecutors circled quickly. Fraud, forgery, embezzlement. His carefully built house of cards collapsed into charges stacked so high no lawyer could spin them away. Serena, desperate to save herself, flipped almost immediately, turning on him in exchange for leniency. Their marriage, the weapon they'd used against me, dissolved into bitter self-preservation. I should have felt triumphant, but what I felt instead was clarity. Revenge wasn't fire, it was light. It revealed who they truly were, burned away illusions until only truth remained. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt. Clara stayed by my side, sharper and steadier than ever. Matteo, though scarred, earned his redemption. The board grudgingly respected him after his testimony, and for the first time in years, my brother looked me in the eyes without shame. "Dad would be proud," he said quietly one evening in the study, his voice raw. I looked up at our father's portrait. The stern gaze softened in my mind. "No," I said. "He'd be satisfied. There's a difference." Life steadied, but the scars remained. Invitations arrived. Business dinners, speaking engagements, even political overtures. I accepted some, declined others. I'd learned to be selective. Betrayal teaches you that power isn't in the noise you make, but in the silence you control. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered, that the final note hadn't yet been played. The twist came 3 months later. A thick envelope arrived at my office, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, crisp and white, with a message typed in bold letters. "Did you really think Alessandro was the only one?" Beneath it was a photo, grainy, black and white, of my father shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize. The caption scrawled in ink. "Your father made deals, dangerous ones. The key wasn't just for Alessandro." I stared at it, the weight of realization pressing into my chest. The key. The deposit box. My father's secrets. I had thought I unlocked all of them, but maybe I had only opened the first door. I folded the paper carefully, sliding it back into the envelope, my pulse steady. This wasn't fear. This wasn't shock. It was a reminder that revenge never truly ends. It only changes hands. That night, as I locked the office and walked into the Newark air, I felt the city humming again. Louder this time. My father's empire was safe. Alessandro and Serena were destroyed. But somewhere out there, another enemy was already watching, waiting, sharpening their blade. I smiled. Let them come. Because now, I wasn't just my father's daughter. I was his heir. And anyone who thought they could bury me had already dug their own grave.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.